Southern Fried True Crime covers cases that are not suitable for young listeners, and there may also be some explicit language used. Listener discretion is advised. March 4th, 2008 was a fair day in Auburn, Alabama. The sun was still setting at around 4 p.m., but by 9 p.m. it was 50 degrees and it wasn't raining, a lovely southern spring night. It was Saturday night, and several cars were driving along Highway 147 when suddenly a young girl appeared in their headlights. She was naked and crying, covered in road rash and waving her arms at them. By the time people stopped, 18-year-old Lauren Burk was lying on her back in the middle of the road, and there was blood everywhere. She was taking deep, slow breaths and was gasping for air. When officers arrived at 9:12 p.m., she was unresponsive. They started CPR until EMS showed up and took over, but Lauren no longer had a pulse or heartbeat. As she was rolled onto a backboard, EMS discovered a gunshot wound to Lauren's upper torso. She was transported to the East Alabama Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead. Everyone who knew Lauren was shocked to find out that she had been shot and killed. She was a sweet, innocent kid, living on the campus of Auburn University. How could she wind up in the middle of the highway, shot and left for dead? Welcome to episode 171, The Murder of Lauren Burk. Auburn, Alabama is on the eastern border of Alabama, a nice driving distance to the bigger cities of Montgomery and Birmingham and the white sand beaches of Orange Beach. The city's unofficial nickname is the loveliest village on the plains, taken from a line in the poem The Deserted Village by Oliver Goldsmith, which opens, "Sweet Auburn, loveliest village of the plain." It's about rural depopulation and the pursuit of obsessive wealth. Auburn is a quintessential college town. Lots of coffee shops and bars with live bands. It hosts a great Oktoberfest with local craft beers from all over the state. And it's an outdoorsy town with about 10 parks and numerous hiking and walking trails. Auburn also brags that while there is plenty of shopping, there are no malls. With a population of about 75,000, Auburn does have a particular small-town feel, even though it is the largest city in eastern Alabama. But that's also considering the 30,000 students and faculty at Auburn University, where Lauren Burk was in her first year. Auburn is a prestigious school, one of the South's largest universities, and is a leader in arts and applied science education, perfect for Lauren's interests, and about a 2-hour drive from her hometown. Lauren Ashley Burk was born on December 30th, 1989 in Marietta, Georgia, to parents Jim Burk and Vivian Gertron, who later divorced. She has a brother named Chad and a sister named Jacqueline. Her mother grew up in Brazil, and her grandparents still live in Rio de Janeiro. Her father and his family hail from Cleveland, Ohio. She was raised in the Jewish faith, and while her parents did divorce, it seemed amicable, and they co-parented their children well. They remained very united after Lauren's death, so much so that news outlets tended to report them as a married couple even a decade later. Jim described Lauren as a happy girl who always looked on the bright side of things. Vivian agreed, saying, "You looked into her eyes and you just saw happiness." While attending Walton High School, Lauren was very popular. One student said Lauren stood out from others because she was level-headed and a very responsible student. The principal told the media that Lauren was a great leader, a great kid, and she was a very, very good student. In 2006, Lauren started dating a fellow student named Sean. He also later talked about how happy his girlfriend was, saying, "Lauren's happiness was infectious. She lived her life with radiance and joy. She was the most amazing person I ever met." In photos, she looks happy, and her wide smile does seem infectious. She had dark hair and eyes, with a lovely tan in summer photos. In 2007, Lauren graduated from high school, then enrolled at Auburn University. She was planning a career in photography and marketing. She lived in an off-campus residence hall and became a member of the Delta Gamma sorority. She continued dating Sean, who also enrolled at Auburn. He lived in an on-campus dorm. On March 4th, 2008, 18-year-old Lauren began her day by having breakfast at a coffee shop on campus with Sean. She then attended classes at 11 a.m. When classes were over, Lauren called her dad and told him about her spring break plans and an upcoming dental appointment. She then went to Sean's dorm to take a nap before an 8:30 p.m. study session at the library with her friend Michael. At around 8 p.m., Lauren left Sean's and walked to her black 2001 Honda Civic, which was parked near the back of a parking lot near Hinton Field. Sean never saw his girlfriend again. 8:30 p.m. came and went, and Lauren did not show up at the library. Michael called Lauren to see where she was, but she didn't answer. After a few more calls, she did finally answer and told Michael she had forgotten about a birthday dinner for a friend, and then she hung up abruptly. Michael didn't think much about the call at the time. Later, he would say he should have realized something was wrong. At around 9 p.m., 5 miles north of Auburn University, several motorists were driving along Highway 147 when they saw Lauren in the road near the turn for Lee Road 72. She was naked and crying, covered in road rash, waving her arms at them. The motorists stopped and blocked traffic from both directions. When they got out of their vehicles, Lauren was lying on her back in the middle of the road. There was blood everywhere. She was taking deep, slow breaths and was gasping for air. Just after 9 p.m., a motorist called 911. Officers arrived at 9:12 p.m., but Lauren was unresponsive. They started CPR until EMS showed up and took over, but Lauren no longer had a pulse or a heartbeat. As she was rolled onto a backboard, EMS discovered a gunshot wound to Lauren's upper back torso. She was transported to the East Alabama Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead. At 9:27 p.m., Lauren's black Honda was found engulfed in flames on campus near Hinton Field. Responding officers tried to track down the owner, but they were not in the crowd surrounding the burning car. They ran the license plate through the system and found out that the owner was a man named Jim Burk. When they reached out to Jim, he explained the car was used by his daughter Lauren. Officers told Jim that Lauren wasn't near her car. In fact, they weren't sure where she was. After the phone call was over, Jim called Lauren's mother, Vivian, to see if she had heard anything from Lauren. She hadn't. Vivian called around to see if anyone else had heard from Lauren, but no one had. Jim started driving toward Auburn. On the way, the Auburn Police Department Assistant Chief Tommy Dawson reached out and asked Jim to meet him at the hospital to see if he could identify the body of a young woman who had been found on the highway. Jim went straight to the hospital, where he confirmed the body to be his daughter Lauren. He later testified she was lying in a gurney with a white sheet up to her neck, like she was sleeping like an angel. I looked at her, I said, "Oh my God." I kissed her forehead, and then I just left. An autopsy concluded that Lauren suffered a single gunshot that entered her upper left back. It had punctured both lungs before exiting through her right upper arm. She had bled to death within 2 or 3 minutes. Based on the entrance wound, the medical examiner determined the muzzle of the gun had been a few inches away from Lauren's skin when fired. She had not been sexually assaulted. Investigators worked to figure out what had happened to Lauren. They wanted to know how she got to Highway 147 while her car was found burning on campus. Was she abducted? If so, was she abducted on campus or off? There were so many questions and few answers. Investigators searched through Lauren's burned-out car. They were able to recover scraps of Lauren's burned clothing and a spent .38 caliber bullet. It appeared that whatever happened to Lauren had definitely taken place in her car, which meant her car must have left the campus at some point. Investigators searched the last place Lauren had been seen alive, Sean's dorm, but didn't find anything of note. He was adamant that he had no idea what had happened to Lauren after she left his dorm room for the study session with Michael. Investigators then spoke to Michael, who told them about the abrupt call he had had with Lauren. He said it sounded like she was in the car during their conversation, which now made a lot of sense. While detectives were starting to put the puzzle pieces together, they still couldn't figure out who had abducted Lauren and why. 2 days later, March 6th, there was still no answers for the public. Auburn University issued a statement saying there was no indication of additional danger to campus or student safety. But students were still understandably nervous. One student told the media that prior to Lauren's murder, we all kind of had this feeling. We're young, we're active, we felt invincible. Now all that was ruined. Another student said, "It's an eye-opener. You always have to be aware of your surroundings." The university tried to help students feel more safe by putting new security measures in place on campus, like setting up an alarm system and providing escorts for students walking to the parking lot at night. But students still flocked to stores to purchase mace and knives, and they double-checked their doors and windows to make sure they were always locked. Luckily, investigators soon had a strong lead. Whoever killed Lauren had also taken her debit card and used it in multiple locations on the night of her death. At 9:17 p.m., just 5 minutes after police responded to the call about the motorists finding Lauren, her credit card was used to buy around $15 worth of gas at a station on the same road where she had been found. Later, the card was again used to buy gas in Atlanta and groceries at a Kroger in LaGrange, Georgia. Investigators were able to obtain a photo of a man using Lauren's card. They sent the photo off to NASA for enhancement in the hopes they could identify the man. Before they could make an identification, the killer nearly got away with another kidnapping, this one in Noonan, Georgia. On March 7th, at about 9:55 a.m., Noonan, Georgia police responded to a report of a possible carjacking in the parking lot of Walmart on Bullsboro Drive. A man named Scott told Noonan officers that he was exiting his vehicle when he saw a black man walking toward him with a gun. Scott said that he quickly got back into his car and watched as the man changed directions and approached an elderly woman who was getting into her car after leaving Walmart. The woman later said the man hit her in the back of the head, then stuck a firearm to the side of her head and told her he was going to kill her and take her money and car. He shoved her into the passenger side floorboard and then took her wallet. He then got into the driver's seat and backed out of the parking lot in an attempt to leave, but Scott began to follow the man, which freaked him out. He jumped from the woman's car and got into a silver Chrysler. Scott called the police, and Walmart loss prevention employees were able to provide officers with a tag number for the silver Chrysler. The tag on the vehicle was registered to a 23-year-old man named Courtney Lockhart with an address in Smiths, Alabama. Noonan police issued a BOLO. 23-year-old Courtney Laurel Lockhart was born in 1984 to parents Catherine and Curtis. While growing up in Smiths, Alabama, Lockhart had virtually no relationship with his father, who had chosen drugs and alcohol over his son. Courtney was known as an outgoing and friendly person. A close friend said he was the person you always wanted to be around. He was always funny. In 2003, after graduating from high school, 18-year-old Courtney enlisted in the Army. His dream was to become a drill sergeant. He went to basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and was later stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado. He went on to serve with the 2nd Brigade Combat Team in Iraq from August 2004 to July 2005. While there, Courtney and his team primarily maintained security at the base and performed escort missions, during which Courtney typically served as a gunner. A sergeant later described the deployment as being in a constant state of alert, adding that their brigade typically suffered 3 to 4 casualties per week as a result of attacks on the base. The team had to be on constant guard and be aware of their surroundings at all times. The sergeant also described several incidents that deeply affected Courtney. Once, he was tasked with cleaning the interior of a vehicle that contained the remains of a fellow gunner killed in action. Another time, he discovered the body of an officer who was killed by a mortar round while using a bathroom. And he also saw a tank containing 4 or 5 soldiers explode when it was struck by enemy fire. While stationed in Iraq, Courtney developed a close relationship with his sergeant, N.A. Prince. By all accounts, he viewed Sergeant Prince as a mentor and father figure, who was all the more important because Courtney had not known his father while growing up. Tragically, on June 11, 2005, a month before the team was supposed to return home, Sergeant Prince was killed in action when his vehicle struck an IED. To make matters worse, Sergeant Prince's death came on the heels of a friendly fire incident when Courtney and his fellow soldiers were attacked by their own forces. The combination of events devastated Courtney and left him numb and traumatized. Despite being scared for his life every single day, Courtney was described as a superb soldier. He earned a Combat Action Badge and an Army Commendation Medal, an award granted for consistent acts of heroism or meritorious service for his role in combat operations. In July 2005, his brigade returned stateside to Fort Carson, Colorado. Upon his return, Courtney and his longtime girlfriend Nicole became engaged. They welcomed a daughter in 2006. But Nicole soon realized things were different. She later said, when he returned, he was mad at times. His attitude was kind of like, I don't care. Courtney started acting out, drinking heavily and smoking pot. He even went AWOL at one point. And then, things got worse. In August 2006, Courtney got into an argument with a small group of soldiers in the mess hall. Afterwards, he left the hall, but waited for the other soldiers outside. When they came out, the argument escalated, and a female, non-commissioned officer attempted to intervene. At that point, Courtney used threatening language and drew what appeared to witnesses to be a pistol. He pushed the officer and told her, "Back off or I will blow your head off, bitch." He was subsequently court-martialed and convicted of communicating a threat, assault, and use of marijuana. He was incarcerated for 7 months and then dishonorably discharged. It was a devastating end to what had been an exemplary career. Courtney, Nicole, and their daughter moved back to his mother's home in Smiths, Alabama. Upon their return, Courtney's family and friends remarked that he seemed like an entirely different person. He was anxious and withdrawn, refusing to talk about his experiences in Iraq and reluctant to leave the house. He often locked himself in his room, and family members found him hiding under the bed or in the closet. During these periods, Courtney would not speak or respond to questions, and according to Nicole, appeared to be not in his right mind. At other times, Courtney was unable to control his paranoia, lashing out in his sleep and refusing to allow people to walk behind him. In April 2007, he started working as a foreman for War Grading, a construction company. He was always punctual and a great worker. However, according to trial testimony, loud job sites, particularly those where nail guns were being used, caused Courtney distress. His coworker later described one incident that caused him to hide behind a work truck. In the spring of 2008, War Grading started performing work at Fort Benning, Georgia. A coworker later said that artillery exercises could be heard from the job site and that the noise adversely affected Courtney's job performance and attendance. His work deteriorated substantially. Courtney's ability to cope with his situation rapidly declined, and he completely isolated himself from his family and his daughter. He inexplicably moved out of his mother's home and began living in his car. His personal hygiene suffered considerably, and he also stopped eating regular meals, living on candy bars and sodas. That's where 23-year-old Courtney Lockhart's life was at when he robbed the lady in the Walmart parking lot on March 7, 2008. Approximately 30 minutes after Noonan police issued a lookout for Courtney's vehicle, they received a call from Phoenix City, Alabama police. They had located him driving the silver Chrysler. He was speeding through a construction zone on Alabama Highway 80. Phoenix City motorcycle officer Williams pulled the Chrysler over. He asked Courtney to exit the vehicle, but Courtney would not get out. When backup arrived, Courtney struggled with Williams and then got back into his Chrysler and sped off. Williams and the other officers all raced after him. The chase reached speeds of 80 miles per hour, and Courtney even went off the road a couple of times. A few miles later, he abruptly stopped and opened his door. At the exact same time, one of the backup officers, Richards, hit Courtney's door with his motorcycle. He flew over the handlebars and landed on the ground. Courtney got out of his car and began running, heading behind a house and off into the woods. Richards attempted to chase Courtney, but the pain from a cut to his forehead and road rash was so excruciating that he had to stop after about 40 yards. But Richards pointed other responding officers in the direction where Courtney ran, and he was quickly apprehended. When they patted him down, Courtney did not have any weapons, but he did have an iPod, which will be important. But hang on. As he was led out of the woods, he told the officers he was sorry, and that he had tried to get help after returning home from Iraq. He didn't specify what he was sorry for. After he was taken to the station, he was interviewed about the robbery and kidnapping that occurred at Walmart earlier that day. Courtney admitted to everything. He then told detectives that during the car chase, he threw a revolver out his car window as he passed by the Publix supermarket on Somerville Road in Phoenix City. The handgun was recovered and taken in for evidence. Courtney also confessed to a string of other robberies he committed on the border of Alabama and Georgia, the first of which took place at a short stop in Smiths, Alabama on February 25th, just a week before Lauren's murder. Courtney said he entered the store, showed the clerk his gun, and said, "Give me the money." The clerk took the money from the register, and then he told her to give him a bag. She said she didn't have one, so Courtney fired a single shot at the cigarette counter and then fled. He then confessed to committing a robbery on March 5th in the parking lot of Florence Hand Nursing Home in LaGrange, Georgia. At around 10:20 p.m., he approached a woman walking towards her car. He pointed a gun at her face and stated, "Give me your purse or you're going to die." The second-to-last robbery took place on March 6th in the parking lot of a Sam's Club in Columbus, Georgia. Courtney said he robbed a woman and her 3-year-old son. He pointed a gun at the head of the child and threatened to shoot him if the woman did not hand over her purse. She handed him her purse, and he fled. When he was done confessing, investigators looked over the iPod that had been found on Courtney during his arrest. It wasn't long before they realized the iPod belonged to Lauren Burk, who had been murdered 3 days prior. Auburn detectives were called in to interview Courtney about Lauren's murder. He waived his rights and gave a full confession. Courtney told detectives he had no intent to rape or kill her. He had only wanted to rob her. He explained that in the morning hours of March 4th, he realized he needed gas for his car, which he was living out of, but he didn't have any money. He would have to rob someone in order to fill up the tank, so he drove around the Auburn area all day looking for a victim. In the evening hours, Courtney went to Auburn University campus and drove around. After a while, he ended up stopping in a parking lot on top of a hill. He backed into a stall next to a fence. That way, he could watch everyone in front of him and no one could see his license plate. Not long after he settled in, a police cruiser drove by. He no longer felt he was in the best place to find a victim, so he left and drove around in other areas. But later that night, he returned to the campus and parked in the lot where Lauren had left her car while visiting Sean in his dorm. Courtney backed his vehicle into a stall like he had before, and then he waited. After some time, he watched as Lauren walked up to her car and slowly opened the driver's side door. Courtney got out of his car with his gun, walked up behind Lauren, and told her to get the fuck in the car. Courtney said he shoved her in, and she climbed into the passenger seat. He got in the driver's seat and asked how much money she had. Lauren didn't say anything at first. She just screamed. Courtney told investigators that he stayed calm and didn't say anything until she finally calmed herself down. Once she was no longer screaming, Lauren handed over $200 in cash and begged to leave. But Courtney didn't let her. Instead, he put the car in drive and took off, making sure to keep his gun pointed at Lauren at all times. While they drove north out of town, Courtney said he told Lauren to take off her clothes. At first, she wouldn't do it, but eventually she did after he threatened her. He explained that he did this not because he wanted to rape her, but because he thought she'd be less likely to escape if she was naked. As they continued to drive, Lauren tried to talk to Courtney about whatever his plan was. She also repeatedly asked if he was going to shoot her. It was clear that 18-year-old Lauren was terrified for her life, but Courtney admitted he didn't try to reassure her. Instead, he kept driving around while talking about how his life was over. Lauren told Courtney that she could help him get a job. He explained to Lauren that he already had a job, so that wasn't the problem. As they drove, Lauren's study partner Michael started calling, wondering where she was. After a few calls, Courtney told Lauren that she could answer the phone, but only if she made up an excuse for why she wasn't there. Lauren agreed. She answered the phone and told Michael she had forgotten about a birthday dinner for a friend, and then she abruptly hung up. Courtney said he and Lauren continued talking about his situation. Lauren kept saying that she wanted to help, but no matter what she said, Courtney said he would tell her she couldn't help because this was the end for him. He told investigators that as they drove along Highway 147, nearing Lee Road, he made a plan to turn around so they could head back to campus, but then the gun went off accidentally. He said they were both shocked, and Lauren started screaming. And then she suddenly jumped out of the car. Courtney said he kept driving so he could turn around at the next turnaround point, but there was already another truck turning around there, so he started heading straight to campus. On the way back, he stopped and filled up Lauren's car with gas. He also splashed some gas inside the car and then rolled the windows down so he wouldn't pass out from the fumes. While driving back to campus, he heard people talking about how somebody's car was leaking gas, so he rolled the windows up and kept going. He parked Lauren's car in the same parking lot he had abducted her from. He said he took $46 of the $200 Lauren offered him and left the rest inside the car. But he took her iPod and debit card and grabbed his gun. He left her keys in the ignition and her clothes inside the car. Courtney then tried to light the gas inside the car with a lighter, but it failed to spark. So he went to his car and grabbed a Burger King bag to use as a starter. He lit the bag on fire, threw it in the car, and then went back to where he had parked his own car. Then he left the campus and stopped to fill up his car with gas, using Lauren's cash. Before leaving town, he drove back to campus to make sure Lauren's car was still burning. When he saw that it was, he headed out of town. From then on, he used Lauren's debit card. He later threw it out the side of the highway. When Courtney was finished confessing, investigators believed he was the true killer of Lauren Burk, but they had a few doubts about his story. Why would he force Lauren to leave the campus with him if he only wanted to rob her? It seemed more likely he wanted to rob and rape her, but he never got the chance to because she jumped out of the car. They also didn't believe Courtney's story that the gun accidentally went off. It didn't seem likely, considering he was a former soldier. It seemed more likely that Lauren realized he wasn't going to let her go, so she went to jump out of the car, and that's when Courtney shot her and then left her to die. Investigators sent the gun Courtney threw out of his vehicle during the car chase off for testing. Ballistics experts confirmed it was the gun that fired the bullet found in Lauren's car. Experts also confirmed it was highly unlikely Courtney's gun went off accidentally. it would take way too much pressure to pull the trigger. It would take 5 pounds of pressure if the hammer was cocked, and 12 if it was not. The autopsy results further proved that Courtney's accidental discharge story wasn't probable. Her injuries showed that the gun had been no more than a few inches away from Lauren when she was shot. For Courtney's story to be true, the gun would have been much further away. But, to play devil's advocate, he might have been holding the gun closely on Lauren, which is why she freaked and jumped out instead of waiting. She may have decided to take her chances with jumping out of a moving car rather than stay that close with a gun trained on her. 23-year-old Courtney Lockhart was charged with capital murder during the commission of robbery, capital murder during the commission of attempted rape, and capital murder during the commission of kidnapping. The prosecution sought the death penalty. Courtney pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Lauren Burk's funeral was held on March 9th at Temple Col Emeth, and she was laid to rest at the Marietta City Cemetery in Marietta, Georgia, her hometown. On November 8, 2010, Courtney's trial began in Lee County Circuit Court with Judge Jacob Walker presiding. Thanks to motions from the defense, the jury did not hear any evidence about the string of robberies Courtney confessed to committing or anything regarding his dishonorable discharge. The jury did know that Courtney was incarcerated before he was discharged from the military. However, they did not know why he was discharged. The prosecution told the jury that Courtney kidnapped Lauren with the intent of robbing and raping her. He didn't accidentally kill her. He shot Lauren as she tried to escape, and then he left her to die. Dr. Glenn King, a forensic psychologist for the prosecution, testified that Courtney Lockhart was absolutely not suffering from any kind of mental disease or defect when he murdered Lauren. Dr. King said he couldn't find any evidence of Lockhart having a mental illness, including PTSD. He said, "He has never had any treatment for it. He has never taken any medications for treatment of mental illness. He has never been hospitalized for mental illness. He has never sought nor received consultation about mental illness. I didn't see any symptoms of any mental illness in him." Dr. King explained that he came to the conclusion that Courtney was not insane at the time of the murder because he engaged in a series of premeditated actions over a lengthy period of time that were all goal-directed towards the abduction and murder of Lauren Burk. Courtney cased the area, backed into a stall to hide his license plate, left when an officer showed up, destroyed evidence, and fled the area. Dr. King testified, "All of that says to me that the behaviors were premeditated, planned, organized, and that he had a definite motive to avoid apprehension and detection." The defense told the jury that the shooting was the irrational, unintentional act of a mentally ill veteran who became impaired as a result of his service. The defense had multiple people, including Courtney's girlfriend Nicole, testify that after coming home from Iraq, he was withdrawn, paranoid, hypervigilant, and aggressive. While Courtney's friends and family painted a picture of a man with a severe mental illness, the defense's own forensic psychologist did not. Dr. Kimberly Ackerson told the jury that there was nothing to indicate that Lockhart was unaware of what he was doing at the time of the offense. Dr. Ackerson testified that she tested Courtney for PTSD and concluded, although he had reported symptoms and traits consistent with PTSD, the complexity and intensity of the symptoms were not sufficient to support a diagnosis of PTSD. Additionally, she said Courtney had an IQ of 86, which makes him below average, and that he was immature and had poor judgment. For some reason, the defense did not have any fellow soldiers testify about how they all had PTSD following their tour in Iraq. Look, we all know about the battle of the experts when it comes to trials that hinge on mental defect. You cannot tell me that the defense could not find a better, more sympathetic expert to testify. And not bringing in his peers was also a huge mistake. Unless you want to call Courtney Lockhart's family and friends all liars, he did exhibit extreme signs of PTSD. On November 18th, after deliberating for around 6 hours over a 2-day period, the jury found Courtney Lockhart guilty of capital murder during the course of a robbery and kidnapping. They acquitted him of committing capital murder during the course of an attempted rape. Next up was the penalty phase, where jurors would decide if Lockhart would serve life without parole or be put to death. During the penalty phase, the prosecution did not present any evidence. The defense presented testimony from Courtney's family and friends expressing both their love and support of him and their remorse over what had happened to Lauren. His mother testified at length regarding Courtney's childhood, upbringing, military service, and character. Courtney's father testified that he had been absent from his son's life for almost 20 years and that he had chosen drugs and alcohol over his son. The defense also presented testimony from 2 corrections officers who testified that Courtney was a respectful inmate who did not engage in violent behavior or cause trouble. Following the penalty phase, the jury unanimously recommended Courtney be sentenced to life without parole. They also issued an itemized verdict which showed that they rejected 2 of the aggravating circumstances advanced by the state. The jury found that the offense was not especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, and that it had not been committed in the course of a rape or attempted rape. With that being said, the jury did agree with 2 of the aggravating circumstances advanced by the state, that the murder was committed while Lockhart was engaged in a kidnapping and a robbery. Finding 2 aggravating circumstances meant the jury could have recommended the death penalty, but they chose not to. Following the jury's decision, Judge Walker said he needed some time to come up with the final sentence. Alabama is the only state that allows a judge to override a jury's decision regarding life or death. On March 2, 2011, Courtney Lockhart's sentencing hearing was held. Numerous members of Lauren's family gave victim impact statements, and they all requested that Lockhart be sentenced to death. Lauren's mother, Vivian, told the judge that he did not deserve any leniency because her daughter received no leniency. Lauren's father, Jim, addressed the court, and he was clearly, though understandably, hostile. This 12-0 decision with the jury, I respect it. I was just wondering if one of the jurors lost a child as we did in the same fashion, if it would be a unanimous decision. I doubt it. He continued, any of you in this courtroom that would have had a child to go through what my daughter went through because of what Lockhart's actions were, I know that your heart would tell you you would want the death penalty too. If any of you had a child who went through that, you would want the death penalty. Give me a break. Jim added that Lockhart still had his own daughter. Courtney didn't take too kindly to this statement. He shouted, "Don't bring my daughter into this. You are not going to bring my daughter into this. I'm sorry for your whole family." Jim responded, "I wish you hadn't brought my daughter into it." In the end, Judge Walker did not follow the jury's recommendation and sentenced Courtney Lockhart to the death penalty. In a 28-page, single-spaced sentencing order, Judge Jacob Walker explained why he disagreed with the jury. He concluded that the kidnapping weighed heavily in favor of the death penalty, stating, Lauren Burk was alone, unarmed, and she was chosen by Lockhart at random. The kidnapping is even more egregious because she was taken from a college campus, a place where students should feel safe, and forced into her own car. Lockhart forced her to undress and held her at gunpoint in order to prevent her escape. Walker also emphasized that the jury was unaware of Lockhart's robbery spree and the true nature of his military service. He said, although the jury heard testimony regarding Lockhart's service, the jury was unaware of the full extent of Lockhart's military disciplinary record. He reasoned that, quote, had the jury been aware of the additional facts known to the court, their sentencing recommendation would likely have differed. This reasoning is a bit strange to me, since Walker is the reason the jury didn't know of the additional facts. He did not have to rule for the defense's motions to keep those facts out of the trial. He could have ruled against the defense and allowed the jury to make this decision for themselves. Lockhart appealed his convictions and death sentence to the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals. A main part of his appeal was the claim that it was unconstitutional to allow a judge to overrule a jury's recommendation. His appeal also argued that the judge shouldn't have been able to use Lockhart's string of robberies against him because he was never tried or convicted for any of them. Which is a good point, and probably why the judge ruled them inadmissible in the first place, even though he used them himself when he overrode the jury's sentence. It's like the chicken and the egg. Should these crimes, for which Courtney had never been convicted, have been used against him in his original trial? If not, when overriding this jury's sentence? Despite these valid claims, the court affirmed the trial court's decision, stating, "We have independently weighed the aggravating and the mitigating circumstances and are convinced, as was the trial court, that death is the appropriate sentence for the murder that Lockhart committed." The court added that Lockhart's sentence was neither disproportionate nor excessive to the penalty imposed in similar cases. In fact, 2/3 of the death sentences imposed in Alabama involve cases of robbery-murder. The court stated, "We have searched the record for any error that has or probably has adversely affected Lockhart's substantial rights and have found no plain error or defect in the proceedings under review." The state was very happy with the court's decision. The Attorney General released a statement. Courtney Lockhart viciously and senselessly struck down an innocent young woman. Even as he was terrorizing Lauren Burk, she responded with kindness, which was met with brutality. Her murder shocked and saddened the people of Lee County and of Alabama, and we are determined that this defendant will not escape justice for his horrendous crime. Following the denial, Lockhart continued to file various appeals. His latest one came in 2021. This time, he claimed he had ineffective counsel. A hearing was held to determine if he really did have ineffective counsel. At this hearing, it came out that the defense's psychologist, Dr. Ackerson, had not been retained until 6 weeks prior to the trial, even though the funds had been approved 18 months prior. Furthermore, it was revealed that Dr. Ackerson was not an expert in PTSD. At the hearing, she told the court that if she had known the defense was retaining her to diagnose Lockhart with PTSD, she would have directed them to seek out another professional. Also at this hearing, a woman named Rebecca testified that she had assisted Courtney Lockhart in his post-conviction proceedings while participating in a legal clinic at her law school. Rebecca testified that she discovered a medical record relating to treatment Courtney had received while still in the military. The document indicated that the treating physician had noted an impression of PTSD and had prescribed Paxil and Trazodone, which are commonly used for the treatment of anxiety and depression. At the time of Courtney's trial, this document had not been discovered and was unknown to both Dr. Ackerson and Dr. King. This is important to note because both testified that Courtney Lockhart did not have a history of PTSD. This document refuted that testimony. As a side note, it bugs me that a law school student found this document fairly easily, while Courtney's own trial counsel evidently did not. In 2017, Dr. King reevaluated Courtney and did diagnose him with PTSD. He explained in a 2021 appeal that the reason his opinion changed is that his original examination and diagnosis only pertained to whether Courtney was competent to stand trial. But King concluded no change in his assessment of whether Courtney Lockhart knew the difference between right and wrong when he abducted and murdered Lauren Burk, or that his actions were caused by mental disease or defect. Dr. King also added that he did not consider PTSD to be a major mental illness, and that Lockhart's PTSD was highly compartmentalized. There was one other forensic psychologist who had testified on Courtney's behalf, but the appeals document said his testimony was refuted because he had shown a bias against the death penalty. He testified for the defense in the majority of cases in which he testified and belonged to anti-death penalty organizations, so they did not find him to be objective enough to be an expert witness. Fair enough, and that's why I did not detail his testimony. So, we have 3 psychiatrists, none of whom specialized in PTSD, one deemed too biased, and 2 that basically recanted their original diagnoses. Despite all of this new information, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed Lockhart's convictions and sentence. The Court of Appeals basically used the same reasoning as Judge Walker, that if the trial jury had been aware of Courtney's crime spree before Lauren's murder, they may have voted for the death penalty. It is what they considered the totality of evidence. Look, we know that Courtney confessed to all of this. It's not necessarily in dispute, but the fact is he wasn't convicted of those crimes. And the fact that he waived Miranda and fully confessed actually demonstrates to me that he was hell-bent on his downward spiral. It was the end, as he had put it to Lauren. Think about it. He did not take all the cash she gave him. He took her debit card, which he had to know would eventually lead police to him. Then he led the cops on a reckless high-speed chase that could have killed him, and then he ran, which could have led to his being shot. As far as the police knew, he was armed and dangerous, and not many eyebrows would have been raised had they decided to shoot to kill at that point. And it was all in culmination of several attempts at kidnapping. It would seem he really was looking for this to be his end. That kind of hopelessness is indicative of suffering from PTSD and certainly contributes to the high rate of suicide in veterans with PTSD. Studies show veterans are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than the rest of the population, and the main reason for that is PTSD and depression, which go hand in hand. And I know I will hear from many people complaining that I am excusing Courtney's behavior. I am not. At all. As I have said many times, it's an explanation, not an excuse. For the record, I find it hard to believe he pulled the trigger by accident. I believe the expert testimony in regards to not only how difficult it would be to pull that trigger accidentally, 5 pounds of pressure if the hammer was cocked, 12 pounds if it wasn't, and I agree that as a soldier, Courtney was not likely to make that mistake. I do think it may have been a knee-jerk reaction when Lauren jumped out, but that's not what he said. But I also believe he did not intend to rape Lauren. He had no history of sexual assault. If he had wanted to assault Lauren, he could have done it while still on campus before driving away, or he could have pulled over once he got off campus. Of course, we don't know for sure what is in a man's heart, but the jury believed him. But that doesn't actually matter in this case, whether he intended to rape her or meant to kill her. What matters was whether or not he met the legal definition of insanity. As usual, competency in this case, as in all American cases, has to do with whether the perpetrator knew right from wrong at the time of the offense. Despite Courtney's mental health struggles, he did know right from wrong, as evidenced from his ability to plan his crimes as well as run from authorities. But I do believe it is unfair to not see all of his actions as an escalation to what his friends, family, and girlfriend had all been reported seeing in Courtney leading up to his crime spree. His paranoia and fears were leading him to hopelessness. He no longer cared what happened to him, again as evidenced by his full confession. It was, in a way, a type of suicide for Courtney. He knew that sooner or later he would be caught. Whether he was looking for suicide by cop in a shootout, or he just wanted to be put away so that he would not be a danger to others, who is to say? My point is, I think the jury got it right. By our definition of mental incompetency or defect, Courtney Lockhart does not fit the standard. Therefore, he is guilty. But the jury saw fit to vote for mercy when it came to sentencing, and I do not believe that a judge should override their recommendation, especially a unanimous decision. I can see a judge needing to step in if a jury is divided, but I think there is a reason that Alabama is the last state to allow this kind of override. We are supposed to trust our jury system. Supreme Court Justice Byron White wrote, "If the defendant preferred the common-sense judgment of a jury to the more tutored but perhaps less sympathetic reaction of the single judge, he was to have it," meaning you can choose a trial by judge instead of jury. Courtney Lockhart chose a jury. But, as Robert Frost wrote, a jury consists of 12 persons chosen to decide who has the better lawyer. There is no question to me that Lockhart suffered from ineffective counsel. Even the appeals court agreed, and yet they wrote that they looked at a totality of evidence, meaning Courtney's crime spree before he kidnapped Lauren. Except, it was not the evidence presented to the jury. So how is that fair? Should they just consider the evidence presented at trial? I am not a lawyer nor a legal scholar, but I do know the appellate courts are supposed to rule on the basis of if there has been an error of law. Again, the judge had the chance to admit that evidence and chose not to. The prosecution is not entitled to a second bite at the apple. That's called double jeopardy. But by considering evidence that was not admitted in court, isn't that giving the state a kind of second bite? Would that not be an error of law? I don't know for sure. It would be above my pay grade to guess. I just know that in my gut, it feels wrong. And if you have listened to my podcast long enough, I am rarely on the side of the defense, with the exception of legitimate wrongful convictions. However, I do believe everyone is entitled to a fair trial. Courtney Lockhart did not receive effective counsel. The fact that the 3 psychiatric experts were in essence disqualified to decide his mental competency is a major problem. His whole defense was mental incompetency. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. It would be difficult for any expert to testify that Lockhart did not know right from wrong at the time of Lauren's murder. If he had been in the midst of a psychotic break, perhaps. And maybe there is an argument for that. We can't know because we didn't hear from an expert about that. But it does stand to reason that he knew exactly what he was doing. He just didn't care. But suicidal ideation is not necessarily a psychotic break. We definitely know that. Again, I believe Courtney Lockhart was guilty by our terms of mental incompetency. I just think we should trust the jury's sentencing recommendation. Luckily, it would seem the state of Alabama agrees, since it does not have a history of executing prisoners who were on death row because of a judge's override. But, as has been said many times before, it is much easier to win an acquittal than an appeal. Once you've been pulled under by the wheels of justice, it is very hard to undo that decision. Lauren's parents have been outspoken in their anger at the appeals process. In an interview from 2018, Jim Burk said, "I just don't understand why a murderer, as heinous as this crime was, as far as how he abducted my daughter, is able to have all these options and Lauren had no options." Lauren's mother, Vivian, agreed, saying, "Why should he have any more rights than my daughter did?" As parents of a murder victim, I completely understand their venom. It's not unusual at all. But they also desperately wanted their daughter's killer to receive the death penalty and are happy with the judge's decision. Again, that is not unusual. But, as Lockhart's attorneys have pointed out, he gets automatic appeals after the death sentence. Every state differs, but defendants only get so many chances for appeal when they are not facing death. It's one of the more unemotional arguments against the death penalty. You don't have to be pro or anti-death penalty to see how the automatic appeals process is worse for the state. Beyond the cost to house a death row defendant, It is the cost of the many appeals that are afforded, which certainly affects taxpayers, no matter their moral stance on the death penalty. And, more importantly, how hurtful those appeals are to families who have to continue to worry that the person who killed their loved one could get a new trial. The parole system can be just as terrible, but at least they can write the parole board and show up for every hearing to ensure the killer remains in prison. If a defendant wins a new trial, they have to start all over again, which is excruciating. As of this recording, Courtney Lockhart is incarcerated at Holman Prison near Atmore, Alabama. He doesn't appear to have an execution date, which is not surprising considering the fact that no defendant has ever been executed in Alabama after a jury returned a unanimous verdict for life. Currently, there are only 5 inmates in Alabama on death row as a result of judicial override, in cases where the sentencing jury voted in favor of life without parole. Courtney is one of these 5 cases. Following his conviction, Lauren's parents, Jim and Vivian, brought a $1 million lawsuit against Auburn University, claiming that the university's 2004 decision to merge its police force with the city's led to inadequate security on campus. If the merger hadn't happened, maybe Lauren would still be alive. Jim told AL.com that the family filed the lawsuit to pressure Auburn to re-establish the campus police force. It wasn't about the money. In the end, the Alabama Board of Adjustment denied the lawsuit, stating that there was a lack of evidence to show that the university was responsible for the very tragic events that led to the murder of Lauren Burk. Auburn University issued a statement saying they will, quote, remain diligent in working with our university security team and local law enforcement officials on our commitment to a safe campus environment. Auburn does have a campus safety app for phones now. The app features emergency contacts, crisis alerts, in-app tip reporting, location services features, which makes it easier to connect with other students, allowing friends to monitor their location temporarily. You can report sexual harassment and rape through the app, which is an easier step for some victims rather than reporting right away in person. I am glad Auburn took measures to make sure all students were safer, but none of that would have helped Lauren. Unfortunately, she met a man who seemed hell-bent on his own destruction, even if it meant hers. It's a tragedy upon tragedy, emblematic of our broken systems in regards to the military and mental health, and then ultimately to the justice system and mental health. Lauren was indeed a brave young woman. She tried to give Courtney her money and walk away. When that didn't work, she tried to talk to him. And while I don't believe Courtney wanted to rape Lauren, she had no way of knowing that when he forced her to undress. And when he shot her, whether purposely or not, she chose to jump from a moving car to try and save her own life. It doesn't get much more brave than that. Southern Fried True Crime is hosted and produced by me, Erica Kelley. Today's episode was researched and written by Haley Gray and myself, with additional research assistance by Anna Luria. As usual, any editorial comments and opinions are my own. For the record, I realize my opinion may be controversial, but it's not the first time I have shown sympathy for a combat veteran. And more to the point, I do not believe the state of Alabama should have the right to overrule a unanimous decision by a jury. There are several points of law to consider in this case that are sticky, but that is one I cannot get past. Again, there is a reason Alabama is the lone state to still practice this way. Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio, and the original graphic art is by Coley Horner. If you have any case suggestions, please go to my website and click on the Listener Suggestion tab. This is the best way for me to get those little-known cases y'all always send me. Please remember that I do not accept suggestions on social media private messages. With 3 platforms to manage, that is very overwhelming for me. I hope you understand. But please come join our Facebook group, Southern Fried True Crime Fans Discussion Group, where we swap recipes, worship Dolly Parton, and share memes. I much prefer spending my social media time in our lovely group. We do, of course, discuss true crime, not just Southern Fried, but all kinds. But it is still very much a Southern lifestyle group. Our group is a safe and fun corner of Facebook, and by God, we mean it when we say no shit asses allowed. It's not just a motto, it's how we run the group. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe and please tell a friend or rate and review on iTunes. I'm also on all large platforms like iHeart, Stitcher, Spotify, and now Amazon and Audible. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Y'all take care.